Hey folks, welcome. Great to see you all here. Sorry for the change. It just seemed, excuse me, I'm still not fully recovered from everything. The, with Dems is going to require a much bigger overhaul than I expected. And I just didn't have the time or the energy. So I'd rather just talk about what you probably all want to talk about more anyway, which is what happened with the election and where do we go from here. And so we'll do that today. In terms of just there won't be any hands raised. Feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself from where you are. And if you have questions, feel free to put the questions um, in the Q&A. And when I get to questions, I'll be taking written questions. No hand raises today. Yeah, please remind everybody where you're from, national Hopium audience. And this is a little bit of a cobbled together thing here. So, and we'll get going here in just a minute. I could spend all day just reading the chat. I'm going to resist that. Tom Wigan is here, my old college roommate. Tom, welcome. Just saw that. Good to have you here, brother. Fellow Jumbo. Jumbo's out in the wild. Okay, let's get going. And so, Susan, it was not a shellacking, and I'll get to that. And I mean, we'll get to that. People have to stop speaking that way. It's a very close election. Okay, let me get going. Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles. This is kind of an impromptu gathering here on a Tuesday. Going to be talking about what happened and what comes next for all of us. And this is, I don't have a presentation. This is just going to be the equivalent of notes or a sketch, right? The way to think about this. I am going really slow in my attempt to make sense of all of this. And in fact, what we're doing at Hopium is that we're opening up this conversation to thoughtful people from around the country who I've been bringing in since the election to talk to us and share their thoughts about what happened and what happens next. And I just recommend that everyone go slow, take their time. There's no reason to rush to judgment, to be respectful and thoughtful as we approach all of this. These are serious matters, and we need to take them seriously in terms of coming to an understanding of what happened and what we need to do to go forward. And so, in the spirit of that, here, I have been resistant or hesitant. I've been waiting to start coming to sort of firm conclusions because I would much rather feel like I'm part of a broad conversation with lots of open voices and discussion so we can learn and from one another, listen to one another, and try to come up with sort of some basic set of understandings. There won't be unanimity. We're not going to all agree about what to do next or what happened. But I think I'm trying to help lead a respectful conversation around that. So we've had Joe Trippi come on and talk about the power of networks and our understandings, which I'll be discussing. We've had John Della come on and talk about what happened with young voters, one of our worst voter performances in the last 20 to 30 years in this election, significant event. And we also had today, um, I released an interview that I just did this morning with Anderson Clayton, where we had significant wins in North Carolina. So I want to start by saying here are a few things I just want to put out there, and I'm going to speak for 15, 20 minutes. We'll get to questions. So number one, I just have to say this again, is that on the question of what happened with everyone's understanding of the election, I just want to remind everybody that in the last week of the election, Kamala Harris had her best week of polling of the whole election. She in all but one of the major forecasters, it tipped back to her winning away from it had been Trump had been ahead 2 weeks out, 2 weeks to go. 538, Nate Silver, the Washington Post, polling averages in the battleground states. So it's important to recognize, and also, we had a very strong performance in the early vote, better in 5 out of the 8 states than we did 20 in 2020. So I think this notion of whether people were wrong or right, I think misses the point of this whole thing. And I know people are going to laugh at that in some ways, but that's okay. Because what the polling showed us is that it was a very close and competitive election. In every single time that I wrote to all of you in the final few months of the election, I said it's close and competitive, and that I thought we were winning the election and we had not won it yet. I never said we were going to win. I never predicted a victory. None of those things ever happened, right? What I said is, based on the information in front of us, I feel that it's more likely that we win than not. The other people that agreed with that were Nate Silver and 538 and lots of other people too, right? So the key here is that this was a very close and competitive election within the margin of error. As I often said in my writing, in my commentary, that we're past the point where the polling can tell us anything other than this is a very close election. And it was a very close election. And this is really important. Donald Trump at this point is going to win the popular vote by 1.4, 1.5%. And the national polling average at 538 at the end was 1.5 or 1.4 for Harris. So clearly within margin of error of polling, right? And second is that this was not a landslide victory. This was not a shellacking. This was not a huge win for the Republicans. This was a very narrow win. And if you look at what happened in this battleground states, we are going to end up losing. And Donald Trump, first of all, is not going to get to 50%, the third consecutive election in a row where he has not broken 50 and not gotten a majority. We are Second is in the battleground state. We're going to end up with him winning Wisconsin by 0.9, Pennsylvania, Michigan by 1.4, and Pennsylvania by 1.9. That means if one vote out of 100 in those three states switched from Trump to us, Kamala Harris would be president-elect right now. Any attempt to describe this as a mandate or a landslide victory or shellacking, you're doing MAGA's work for them in presenting it this way. This was an unbelievably close election, particularly in the Electoral College. And look, we're going to end up probably gaining a seat in the House. At this point, we've only lost 2 seats in the Senate, seats that were always going to be hard for us, Ohio and Montana. Pennsylvania is not, in my view, been called yet, and we'll see what happens. We have to go through the recount. And we obviously had a lot of success in this election, despite the national headwinds, right? We won in these battleground Senate races, which were huge victories for us in Arizona and in Michigan and in Wisconsin and in, I'm forgetting the other battleground state. I'll think of it in a second. We had, huge wins as Anderson Clayton goes through in North Carolina. We have more statewide elected officials in North Carolina today than we've had in decades, and we broke their supermajority. And we won the governorship in North Carolina. And so North Carolina actually, and we kept a Supreme Court seat that was contested. We won Supreme Court seats in Michigan. We kept the House in Pennsylvania, and so and in Nebraska, another place that we invested a lot of money, right? We kept the blue dot, and we won a bunch of other critical state legislative races there. So this was not I'm coming to sort of a new way of trying to describe the election, which is that, um, in 2022, I go back to a memo that I wrote in the fall of 2021, where I said that I felt the midterms were going to be closer than people expected because of three things. One is that Joe Biden had been a good president and we would have a strong track record to run on. Second was that the Republicans were too extreme and that they had run towards MAGA politics that had failed in 2018 and 2020 and would likely be hard to sell to voters that had just rejected it. And third is the power of the Democratic grassroots to give us the money we need to control the information environment and to push our performance to the upper end of what's possible on the ground. And those three things I think work together to create the election that we had in 2022. And yes, it was my expectation and my belief that that would be the likely thing that would happen this time as well, because Joe Biden had still been a good president. The country was clearly, in my view, better off today, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. They were still too extreme, and frankly, the version of MAGA in 2024 was the most extreme version of MAGA that we've encountered since Trump began in 2015. And the power of our grassroots, right, would all be able to, again, help us control the information environment through the money raised and push our performance on the ground to the upper end of what's possible. And it was my belief that those conditions which created 2022 would also create our success in 2024. And I want to be clear, we had a lot of successes in 2024. And part of the way I think I'm beginning to think about this is that the conditions that I described earlier forestalled a red wave. We had low Biden approval rating and high inflation. Inflation was much higher in 2022. It was 9% in 2022. In this year, it's been under 3% in the election year. And we went into the final weeks of the election with the economy being stronger today than it's been arguably in 60 years. And I'm not sure what happened. There may be allergies today. And so, it was my belief that we would be able to forestall, in essence, the downward pressure on Biden's low approval rating and the high inflation, which we forestalled in 2022, that we would be able to do it again. Because at the end of the day, the thing that had been driving our politics in every election since 2018, 2020, 2022, 2023, and was the ugliness, the fear and opposition to MAGA. And that's not what happened at the presidential level, right? We have to acknowledge it was very close, but we didn't win, obviously. And we didn't have the election we all wanted to have. And I think that as I have been writing to you, I have far more questions than answers to what happened. But certainly, I have a few observations that I'll make here today, right? One is, I think there was a clear failure of Future Forward, the super PAC, which had unprecedented resources, $700 million, to disqualify Donald Trump and to raise these issues around the fear and opposition to MAGA that had driven our politics since 2018 to make them salient enough in order for us to win. I mean, I always believed, if you go back and listen to the talks that I gave, what I always said was Donald Trump is the ugliest political thing that we've ever seen. Those of us in politics are aware that his negatives and the things that he has bringing here, it also is enormous downward pressure on him and the Republican brand. Being a rapist, a fraudster, a traitor, a felon. No political party had ever run a felon who had been convicted 34 times as a major presidential candidate before. For all the downward pressure on Biden because of his low approval rating and his poor debate performance and the struggle and high inflation, right? The downward pressure on Trump, I always believed would be far greater than the downward pressure on us, as it was in all of these, the 2022 and the 2023 elections. And the truth is, it wasn't. And I don't think that to me, one of the most baked in things into the electorate that as we entered 2024 was this fear and opposition to MAGA that had been driving the behavior of so many voters all the way back to 2018. This stuff was in the ether. People knew that something had gone wrong with the Republican Party. And this was not something that we needed or required an enormous amount of energy to evoke out of people. I mean, part of what happened in 2022 is this got evoked through Uvalde and shooting and the shooting in upstate New York, and then the Dobbs decision, and then the January 6th committee hearings. This was evoked, the fear and opposition to MAGA was evoked, right, and brought out into the electorate. I think the super PAC failed to adequately disqualify Trump. They held their ads to very late, which I think was an incredible mistake, because when you go late in advertising, you're allowing others to dictate the terms of the conversation you're having. You have to shape the conversation, not just respond to it. And I think there was a mistake in that regard. The second thing that I wonder, and this is really more of an open question, and I think it's going to be a critical part of what we discuss going forward, is the decision by the Harris campaign to spend so much time talking about how prices were so high. I mean, one of the general rules of communications, political communications, is you don't make your opponent's arguments for them. And we ended up spending a lot of money and time making one of Donald Trump's central arguments for him, which is that prices were too high and that the Harris administration had failed. And I know that what I'm about to say is a place of enormous disagreement, discussion in our family, right, about this. And I think it's why the campaign itself has a lot. We need to hear from them. And I've been a little bit slow about coming to judgment because I really did want to hear from the campaign itself. But I continue to wonder whether or not the struggle, and I talked about this with John Della Volpe a couple of days ago, is that I still think that we could have talked about inflation too high, but also have talked about the good things that we had done. I don't think these were mutually exclusive. And I think we could have talked about how we inherited this incredible mess under Trump and that we had made things better and that we didn't get everything done exactly the way we wanted, but we tried, but we did make real progress and that we had an agenda to keep making progress from where we were. But to have anchored our general election narrative in the mess that he created, to remind people of the mess that he had left the country in, the insurrection, COVID, his mismanagement, his craziness, and to have talked about all the good things that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris did. And I think that I worry that part of what happened here is that in the crush of this event, of this campaign, where they had such a compressed timeline, July 21st on, that that they were unable to get to the right place on these economic issues. And I'm not really blaming them. I'm saying this stuff was really hard, but I don't know that Kamala Harris could have ever run as anything other than the incumbent or some version of the incumbent. And that she needed to both talk about the struggle of inflation and the struggle of prices, but also to talk about how they had done something about it. The IRA actually helped lower inflation down. We were running with inflation being back to 2%. We had actually gotten to the other side of inflation. And I know the story that you hear as well, people weren't open to that and hearing that. I just don't, I am going to take a very strong position that Democrats have to have more confidence in our ability to persuade people about things that are true and not yield constantly to a red-pilled, right-wing dominated information ecosystem. Because if all we do is play within their frame, we're always going to lose. We have to create a new frame. We have to create new understandings. We have to invest money to create, to tell our story and not always be responding to a world that they've shaped and built through their media. And the truth is that we have enough money in these kinds of big campaigns to do it. Certainly the Senate campaigns figured out how to do this, and so did they figure out how to do it in North Carolina. And so I don't really buy this notion that this was like an unwinnable election. It was too close to be unwinnable. One vote out of 100 in the battle in 3 battleground states determined the outcome of this election. And so I think it was tough. It was hard. I think the assignment that everybody was given was difficult, but it was not impossible because other Democrats won in these very same places, right? And then third, I want to say that I continue to come back to this fundamental understanding that I have about this election, that Kamala Harris did an unbelievable job as a candidate, and she left it all on the playing field for us. she was given a very difficult assignment. And starting on July 21st, she was down 3 points in national polls. There was, and she was able to take the baton from Joe Biden. She was able to pull the party back together. She was able, around her leadership. She picked a great VP. She ran a remarkable convention. She kicked Donald Trump's ass in the debate, so much so that the big blubbery baby man wouldn't debate her a second time. She created a narrative and a story about herself and the election and her groundedness in the middle class that was compelling to voters. And I think that she did a phenomenal job. And I'm really proud of her. And I think we have to be extraordinarily grateful and recognize the difficulty of the task that she was given. That I said this, the line about how women in life, are always dancing with their partner, but they're dancing backwards with high heels on and have to still do the same thing. Kamala Harris was dancing backwards with the highest heels than anybody had ever seen, and she still pulled this off brilliantly. And I want to give her enormous credit, I think, for having done an extraordinary job in very difficult circumstances that she inherited on July 21st. Fourth, structural loudness, stuff we talk about here all the time. We are in an incredible deficit as a family in the day-to-day discourse in our country. And I have written about this. This was a central reason that I founded Hopium. I created Hopium to help myself, for me to get louder and to reach more people. We're up to 150,000 people now here at Hopium. But I've talked about this a lot with Joe Trippi and with Dan Pfeiffer and Tara a few weeks ago. But there has to be far more money allocated in our family. There are three things that I think we have to do going forward. One is we've got to build this pro-democracy communications infrastructure that is still very nascent and insufficient for the task at hand. Second is that our electeds have to start acting as if they are information warriors every day and not just legislators or people that govern. And I'll give you a good example of that. One of you wrote back on our chat today that you've been calling your electeds in Congress to ask them to lead the fight against Trump's four disastrous, dangerous, unacceptable cabinet appointments. And one of the responses you got back is in the House is they don't vote on cabinet appointments. Well, Jim McGovern, and I'll share this tomorrow, went to the floor of the House today and made this incredible case against those four appointments. There has to become a greater understanding of our leaders that they are operating in an information war 24/7, 365, and they must be physically present in the information war every day. And it cannot be that they hide behind press releases and things that nobody reads. All of our elected leaders have to get much louder. And then finally, the other piece that I've been writing about is the need for the party to reimagine itself, to get louder, to occupy this 24/7, 365 space, to be more like Midas Touch and less like a 20th century Democratic Party, to be always on, always communicating, always in the game. And then us too, right? And us having consciousness of information, being information warriors. I think the campaign treated all of us like we were not partners in the fight, but donors to the cause. Almost all of the communication we got from the Harris campaign was about giving them more money. And it wasn't about ways that we could really help the campaign and be information warriors. There were probably 5 to 6 million people that donated to the Harris campaign. The reach of those 5 to 6 million people, if we reach 10 people a day, that's 50 million people. That's the way their politics works. Their politics is not just loud at the institutional level. There's an awareness of the need for amplification on their side and to be networked into the narrative and message and then amplifying it. We have to start creating a much greater consciousness in the Democratic Party about amplification and about the role that each of us play in being able to reach another 5 or 10 people. I go back to this sort of foundational story at Hopium that I've told many times, which is that in the early days of Hopium, one of our Hopium community members, and I'm forgetting her name now, wrote a story about how she'd gone out to dinner with three of her friends and they were all dumping on Joe Biden and that she used things she had learned at Hopium and told them what a good job Joe Biden was doing. And by the end of the dinner, they'd all come around and they were excited about his candidacy. Well, all of us have those opportunities every day, right? And we need to become more conscious of the need of persuasion, putting out good information about our party, our country, each other, all these things, right? The very Hopium kind of putting positive sentiment out into the world to respond to their negative sentiment. But we have more latent power than we understand. And so far, that power has been mined to put money into campaigns, to let campaigns shape the information environment. Our next set of leaders in the Democratic Party, and they'll all be coming to address us over the next few months, have to really talk to us about how we're going to mine the information power of our supporters and our donors and all of you, not just your financial power. And we need to rethink all of this, I think, going forward. Um, Two more points. One is that I do think, and I wrote about this a lot at Hopium, was that we needed, and we didn't have, and we need one now, sort of a theory of the case around reform and renewal. We cannot be the party of Washington. We cannot be the party that accepts the status quo. We should have challenged more aggressively sort of the corrupt ways of the city, of our capital. And because for independent voters and young people, there is a profound sense that Washington is distant and it's corrupt and it's broken. And it wasn't just enough to cite the price increases by corporations. This was about reforming the system and cracking down on corruption and for example, passing laws that regulate, that force rules on the Supreme Court, the fundamental rules that every government employee in the entire country have to follow, except for these six Republican Supreme Court justices. We didn't have an agenda of reform and renewal and of cleaning up Washington, and we desperately need one going forward. This is, I think, was a missed opportunity in this election and one that we have to execute on going forward. As all of you are Hopium members, if you know this, I mean, how many times did I write about this? I mean, some of you got sick of it after a while, but I mean, it's something that I wrote about in my big New Republic piece in February and something I constantly harped on. And then finally, I think one of the most ridiculous early memes coming out of this election is this notion that Democrats don't listen to working people. And I just, it's something that I find to be so almost like absurd on its face that I can't believe that people are saying it. And I'll explain why, right? So since 1989 and the Cold War ended and a new age of globalization began, there have been 52 million jobs created in America. 50 million of them have been created under three Democratic presidents, essentially all of them. We have continually, this is what we would have covered in With Dems today, we have continually made the lives of the American people better over this time. We've created three booming economies, rising wages, lower deficits, American progress. We passed the EITC, which moved tens of millions of people out of poverty. We passed the ACA, which allowed working people to have access to, high quality, low cost, moderately costed or low cost health insurance for the first time. And we now have the lowest uninsured rate in American history. The other thing that the ACA did is that it allowed entrepreneurship because you could leave a job that you were in before, knowing that health insurance would be on the other side. And it's one of the reasons that we've seen this explosion of new business formation in the United States, which is that creating a market where you could get health insurance no matter what your job was allowed more risk taking and entrepreneurship. It's a huge achievement, by the Democratic Party. We also passed the three big Biden investment bills that are going to be creating, if they're not destroyed by the Trump administration, they're going to be creating jobs and opportunities for workers for a generation to come. We did more to advance and tackle climate change than any administration in modern American history. And what have the Republicans done during this time? This party that's supposedly listening to working people, right? What they've created is three consecutive recessions in a row, massive job loss in the United States, wages not making progress, spiraling deficits. They tried to unravel the ACA, which was a central thing that helped working people in the United States. They've attacked unions. Joe Biden did more to support the most pro-labor president in the history of the country. This notion that our fundamental project as Democrats is anything other than trying to help working people get ahead in their lives is just fucking bullshit. And it's unbelievable to me that people are saying it. It may be that we weren't successful in communicating these things to working people in this election. But the notion that our orientation isn't about, as Bill Clinton called it, the forgotten middle class in 1992, or Joe Biden being the first president to stand at a on a picket line, right, and walk a picket line, or all the things that Kamala Harris did during this campaign, talking about the need to lower housing costs, to create it, make it easier for people to start new businesses, right? To continue to maintain the ACA, which has been this engine of middle class upward mobility in recent years. This idea that this isn't our central focus and that we're sort of focused on other things is an absurdity, and we shouldn't play into it. It's ridiculous. It doesn't mean that we effectively communicated all of this. And as all of you know, right, I agree with that. And I think that in part what you're already seeing, because I don't believe that lived experience, right, is lived experience is in part a political construct. You're already seeing Republicans going from really being super negative on the economy to being really positive about the economy now, right? A reminder that this whole discourse around people's lived experience was heavily influenced by right-wing media and the propaganda machine on the right. So I want to conclude. I went on longer than I thought. I mean, this is obviously more than just notes, right? These are things that we've been talking about and I want to conclude by saying that, look, this was a very close election. I think Donald Trump is already dramatically because he's diminished, because he's a madman, because he's an extremist, he's not some grand strategist, that he's already misreading his mandate and that he's already putting forward completely unacceptable people to lead our country for whatever reason. And we can get into that in the Q&A. And I think he's already made mistakes. I think he's already blowing it in some ways, but only if we communicate that, only if we help explain to the American people about what he's really doing. Because what happens is that none of his negatives and his errors, they're not adequately amplified. So part of it is all of you have a big role to play in making sure that we're talking about him and what he's doing to your colleagues, to your neighbors. People have said, Simon, you're just preaching to the converted, right? You need to be talking to the undecided folks. I don't agree with that at all, right? The way to think about this is we start with us and then we build out. We have to understand in order to be persuasive to other people. And so the work of Hopium has been in essence to teach the teachers, right? The work of Hopium is to make all of you who are information warriors, proud patriots, and information warriors for your democracy more capable of doing this critical work in a time where they are far louder than we are. But I think that we have a lot to learn. I mean, just to end here, is that I've laid out some thoughts today. Some of these I may come to believe were wrong, right? And I may change my mind. I'm offering what I see today, 2 weeks out after, what has been an incredibly difficult election and moment for the country. But here at Hopium, we're going to continue in the same spirit that we've been in, which is we're going to keep working our asses off and out hustle the other guys. And I think that part of what I want to conclude with is something I was saying at the beginning. If any of you need evidence that the money you gave and the work that you did mattered, listen to Anderson Clayton today and the gains that we made in North Carolina. Look at what's happening in Derek Tran's race in California right now, where we could end up winning one of these House seats by 200, 300 votes. I want to go through, just to conclude here, is that our community made big investments of money and time in places. In Arizona, we were the largest fundraiser for Ruben Gallego, who ended up winning that Senate seat in what ended up being a very tough year for us in Arizona. Incredibly important victory. Every Senate seat matters right now, right? Second is we were the largest outside investor in North Carolina. Anderson Clayton talks about this and talks about how the wins they had, including the Supreme Court race that we just won last night, would not have happened without the investments that we made and the work that we did on the ground in North Carolina. We invested in Nebraska, where we kept the blue dot, and we had other important on-the-ground legislative victories. Jane Klebb will come report to us soon about the gains that we made there. And what I'm also really excited about is that so far in the House, we've flipped 6 seats, turned 6 seats from red to blue. 5 of them were ones that we invested huge amounts of money in and made big bets on. So this community and the money that we spent had us, we got wins across the board here, everybody. Arizona, Nebraska, North Carolina, 5 out of the 6 House seats that we flipped. We played an important and constructive role here. And one of the reasons that I'm, going on with Hopium is not only because, frankly, many of you have asked me to, and this has become an important touchstone for you and your relationship to your democracy, but it's also because we were successful here. And in the way that we deployed ourselves, our resources, our volunteerism, we made a difference here. I wish the election had come out better, and it's heartbreaking. But I'm also not going to stop fighting, because if part of my proscription is that we have to go to a 24/7, 365 party, well, then we got to do it ourselves here every day. And that's why I haven't let up. I mean, I've been here every day since the election. I mean, I just went out to LA to do a big thank you party for some of the Hopium community in Los Angeles. I hope to be able to do that in some of the other big cities in the coming weeks as well, because I have so much gratitude towards all of you for this community that we've built, for the work that you did, for the democracy that we continue to fight for every day. And so I just want to conclude by saying thanks, everybody. I mean, this has been a lot of fun. This was not a good election for us, but we did have wins. This was not a shellacking. It's not a blowout. None of those things are true. We're going to end up probably gaining a House seat. And we have to be nuanced enough to understand, yeah, this was a devastating loss, but there was also good things that happened, and we can talk about both of them at the same time. This idea this was a landslide or some kind of mandate for Donald Trump is the core of their narrative and talking points. It's like his lie every day that he was winning in the polls when he wasn't. They're going to grossly exaggerate the size of his victory. There's no reason for us to play ball in any of that. Okay, let me go to questions. Thanks, everybody. That was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. And let me get a sense of where people's heads are at. And let me try to, respond to. Yeah, look, I want to. I've seen this already now pop up a few times, and let me just address it. I think there's going to be an incredible opportunity for us now, not in May, but now, to help people understand about what Donald Trump really is and what he's really trying to do. Today, Walmart made a public announcement that they are worried. It would have been nice if they had done this in October, but they didn't. That Trump's tariffs are going to raise prices on all of their things in their store for people, right? And all of a sudden, Republicans in Congress, oh, they have to own Donald Trump now. They have to own his madness. They have to own his crazy appointments. They have to own his desire to crush the Senate and create a Roman Senate instead of an American Senate, a late Roman Empire Senate, then a rubber stamp Senate rather than a independent legislative branch Senate, which is what he's trying to do right now. They have to own his tariffs, which could destroy the American economy. They have to own that he's going to try to saw off and give Ukraine to a genocidal maniac and weaken our alliances and hurt our European partners. They have to own the fact that he's going to do everything he can to make sure the planet warms faster and that climate change accelerates. They're going to have to own his mass deportations that are going to come. They're going to have to own the fact that he's putting people into his cabinet who are, rapists and fraudsters and traitors and felons, just like he is, right? And that how an embarrassment this is for the United States. All of this, the way I describe this, and I tweeted on this today, is that it's like locker room talk with Trump, right? He just says this crazy stuff, but he doesn't really believe it, right? He'll come around, and well, let's see, right? I mean, he came out of the box with the craziest cabinet appointments in the history of the country. Some of the most dangerous people that have ever been put forward for any government position in the history of the United States. Matt Gaetz is being accused of rape, not just having sex with prostitutes or doing drugs, but raping an underage woman. Pete Hegseth is clearly got a history of sexual assault, right, that we're now dealing with. He also may have raped a woman. What we learned in the last 24 hours is that one of these things that have come out about his time in California was that a woman is accusing him of raping her, right? So we now have two of the four, and then we know that Robert Kennedy had sex with his underage nanny at his house. He's admitted this, right? So you've got three of Trump's major cabinet appointments being credibly accused of rape, right? And it's like, you got to be kidding me that this is like something that's within the normal bounds of any understanding of what should be acceptable in the United States of America. And then Tulsi Gabbard, who is clearly a mouthpiece for Vladimir Putin, who's being celebrated in Russia right now, who would be a devastating appointment for the security of the United States. And we need to be fighting these things with everything that we got. Trump, I think, made an error with these picks. I think it's a bridge too far for the Senate and House Republicans. And that if he tries to appoint these folks with the help of Mike Johnson, and Greg Sargent has a great piece in the New Republic about this today, I think it's really going to, I think unless he envisions there never being elections ever again, which is certainly part of his potentially crazy brain, those that do have elections in 2 years in the Republican Party are going to start getting very nervous already, and they already are. I mean, you're not seeing huge enthusiasm for coming from this Republican Senate for Matt Gaetz and some of these other picks. And so we have to keep the pressure on. We can't let them, get away unchallenged. I mean, this is unacceptable, and we have to say so every day. And I will be circulating that piece from Congressman McGovern tomorrow at Hopium. Let me go to a few more questions. Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard's appointment is, the most scary. I also just want to say that, the Robert Kennedy has been talked about generously by a handful of Democrats in the last few days, including people that I respect. And I just can't even believe it. So first of all, he's the most pro-Russian politician. His pro-Russian stances over the last few months have been equal to Trump and Tulsi Gabbard and others. He's in the most extreme pro-Russian camp, which raises questions about whether he was also compromised and penetrated like some of these other folks. Number one. Number two is that the attacking of vaccines. Vaccines are a prerequisite for public schools to function. They're a prerequisite for our society to stay together. Because if we have a case where you think you're going to school with kids who are unvaccinated, then you can't put your kids into that school. I mean, the level of social cohesion in the United States is in part determined by our aggressive vaccination regime, which has been one of the most successful medical advance, whatever you want to look at the progress of humankind over the last 200 years, there's almost universal understanding that among the most important things that have raised life expectancy all around the world dramatically over the last 70, 80 years is universal vaccines. And the notion that we are now opening up the question about whether vaccines are a legitimate public health tool is suicidal as a country. I mean, this is just pure, let's just take the knife and just, slit it across our throat. And what you all should know is that the very first major, in the social media age, Russian disinformation operation in the United States was around vaccines. It began before 2015. This has been well documented by researchers. The first thing the Russians did was to raise vaccines hesitancy and skepticism and to accelerate it and augment it. And why? Because if you pull apart the vaccine regimes in the United States, you're destroying public health and you're killing Americans. You're killing people. Robert Kennedy wants to kill people, right? The Russians in 2014 and 2015 and 2016, in addition to adopting Donald Trump, also worked on vaccines and they worked through the NRA. What does the NRA do? The NRA also kills people. And so these are things that are being designed to destroy the country. And I just don't think that I'm flabbergasted that there are Democrats who are looking at Robert Kennedy other than as one of the greatest threats to our public health and to civil society in the United States that we've seen in modern times. Certainly his own family believes he is, right? And so, we cannot sleepwalk into this next chapter. And I'm going to continue to try to hold, everyone's feet to the fire on this stuff. And we have to keep educating ourselves, getting smarter, sharing this information with others, and doing the work we need to do for our kids and our grandkids. Let me keep looking at questions here. Let me go to the Q&A. Sorry. I was looking at the chat, which is fun. Thank you, everybody. Um, so somebody here, Mike says, I've heard view that goes like this: Dems should not try to save America from Trump. Let him do the worst so the public realizes his level of incompetence. I think that's the craziest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life. Are we really just going to let Tulsi Gabbard dismantle the US intelligence community and turn our secrets over to Russia without fighting? I mean, come on, guys. And I just want to say that part of the reason that I'm asking everybody to go slow is that I don't think in any post-election period that I've been in, I've heard more stupid, ridiculous commentary than I've heard in the last several weeks. So ill-informed, so self-motivated and self-dealing in essence, right? And it's why I'm asking everyone to go slow and to be humble about this. And I'm not picking on you in this, but my God, the number of just crazy things that I see posted in the Hopium chat every day that are just desperate and kind of crazy. It's just I feel it's like tragic for me, right? I mean, no, I'm not going to let Robert Kennedy kill people in the United States. I'm not going to let Tulsi Gabbard dismantle the American, security state. I'm not going to let Pete Hegseth drive us off a cliff. I'm not going to do it. I mean, I may not be successful, but the notion that we should passively let all these people get in without challenging them is, you might as well, just give up, right? You might as well obey in advance. It's obeying in advance. It's what they want you to do. They don't want you to fight. They don't want you to hold them accountable. And I think that, I've seen that expressed. And the reason I raised it is because I do feel that it's kind of, batshit crazy and not something that we need, that certainly I don't agree with it. Um, yeah, I mean, Fred, I see your comments about offering examples. Well, look, I got let me just remind everybody about a few things, right? Because this is coming up in the various discussions. Look at the organizations that I have regularly collaborated with over the last few months, right? Been on tons of Midas Touch discussions, did an entire series with Tara McGowan and Courier Newsroom, um, was a frequent guest on Resolute Squares, and in fact, I'm doing it tonight at 7 live. If any of you want to join us, Resolute Square. We worked in our project to elect Democrats. We worked with the Democrats, Grassroots Democrats HQ, with the GCCC, with Markers for Democracy, with Postcards for Virginia. I regularly did the Friday Power Lunch, and promoted grassroots groups. I spoke, just so you guys know, in the last 2.5 years, I've probably done free presentations to various groups. Many of you may have seen them, me do them, at least 150 presentations to various Democratic, left of center progressive grassroots groups around the country, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock Eastern time. Many of you have seen me on them. I don't know that there's anybody who's done more to try to lift up the new infrastructure of the progressive family than I have over the last couple of years, and to showcase new talent and new people and to lift up, new voices. And I haven't been able to do it for everybody. I mean, there's just a limit. I'm just one guy, but this has been a central part where I see myself as being in a network of other leaders and other institutions and other networks, right? I mean, when I speak to indivisible in one place. I'm speaking not just to an organization, but to a network of political activists. And part of what I've tried to do with Hopium is have Hopium become a place where many of these network leaders are connecting with each other and connecting in order to use information that makes them more effective in their work. And one of the things I was really proud of this cycle is how many of you adopted programs around vote on day one and promoting the early vote, which is something that I think we had a lot of success in, and something is another thing that I'll be writing about in the coming weeks. But I do think that, I've worked very hard to try to lift up other actors in the system. And certainly we've invested in a lot of important leaders like Anderson Clayton and Ruben Gallego and Jane Clabb and Ben Wickler and others, and also the individual politicians. I mean, this is a place that's really been about investing outward and lifting up parts of our family that we feel need to be given, more attention. I mean, all that Tara and I did a series of wonderful shows at Closing Strong with Courier, which, by the way, was an attempt by me to reach younger people, right? That I realize our audience here, because we use a lot of words and because we're a little bit older, we're not a natural fit for younger folks. And I did this whole series that was very heavily cut up on TikTok and Instagram as a way of closing out the election, knowing that we needed to be talking to young people more than we were. I knew it was just going to be a drop in the bucket, but that was also part of the theory of Closing Strong, is that what many of you may not have seen, you saw YouTube versions of it, but it was all chopped up and put on in small bits on Instagram and on TikTok too. And Courier has a massive TikTok following, and it's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this project so I could learn more about this new media, the idioms, the language, the understandings of how to use this, so that if I stayed in Hopium, that I could start to contemplate growing the demography of of our audience, right? Because this audience is, because Substack is a word-based medium, it's by nature a self-selecting older audience. But if I want to take the Hopium Simon brand into younger demographics, I'm going to have to really change how I do that. And I don't know that I know how to do that. I'm not young anymore, right? I do have young kids, but I am not young. And excuse me. And so that's part of the reason I did it. And so, yes, I'm going to continue and commit to you. I mean, one of the things that I'm definitely going to do is you're going to see a lot more, call them podcasts, interviews, whatever you want to call them, of innovators, elected leaders, strategists, thinkers, right, who are helping us reimagine what we have to do next, and creating this place as a hub of discussion around the next thing, right? Which is something that I did for the party 20 years ago, the last time that we were out of power. And in fact, tomorrow I'll share a New York Times Magazine piece about my work literally 20 years ago, around building an organization that became known as the Democracy Alliance, which is a group that has poured billions of dollars into center left infrastructure over the last 20 years, is something that I helped create 20 years ago. But we need to do new things now, and we need new strategies and new tactics for how, we're going to move forward. Yeah. Okay. Let me go to questions again. Hey, Fred. Thank you for. Yeah, people are asking about what our strategy is going to be in 2025 towards candidates 2025 and 2026. I'm very open to what we do. I mean, I will, as some of you heard me say, when I founded Hopium, endorsing candidates and raising money was not part of the plan. I thought this was just going to be a newsletter, but we did it because, frankly, the community asked to do it, and so then we did it, and we stuck our toe in the water in Wisconsin in the Supreme Court race, and in Jacksonville, Florida, and a few other things that we did, and then we did a lot of work in Virginia 2 years ago, um, or a year ago, right? A year ago, we did a lot of work in Virginia a year ago. That's when our candidate and fundraising thing really took off, was in the Virginia state legislative races a year ago. We'll be playing, all that's going to come. We have time for that. I still, 2024 is not finished yet. And I want to keep those of you who are working to help Bob Casey and also the two House races in California. Thank you for that. There may be some need to help out in the North Carolina recount in the Supreme Court. I'll let you know about that. I'm not asking people to give money right now because I feel like we gave a lot of money and I don't I'm not gonna I feel like we sort of did our part this cycle a little bit financially. And I want to start, focusing on what comes next. I mean, as all of you know who have been core Hopium people, my bias here is towards open seat and challenger races and non-incumbents, which, because my view is that incumbents often have the ability to raise money and take care of their business easily, and that the sort of where your dollar and your volunteerism goes the furthest is with open seat and challenger races, non-incumbent races, which is why we got behind Gallego so early and why North Carolina, which was an expansion opportunity for us, we went there. Um, and um, and so that's going to be a little bit challenging for us for this coming year because we often don't get the open seat and challenger recruits until sort of late in the odd year, late 2025. But there are going to be Virginia races, North Carolina races. There are going to be special elections that we will be able to focus on this year, as we did in the odd year in 2023, right, where we played. And there's going to be a Supreme Court race again in Wisconsin. I mean, we're going to be open to all those things. I always come back to you with this basic idea, though, is that I only really make recommendations to you that I would sort of get behind myself. We don't have I don't believe in having a long list. I believe in having a very short, focused list. And that's part of my expertise that is bringing to you, what I feel is the places where your money and your work goes the furthest, as opposed to having a long laundry list of stuff. And I know that frustrated some of our community sometimes because for example, we didn't get involved in Florida and Texas where we have a lot of Hopium members. I didn't feel that I could make those recommendations to you and stick by them. And so just bear with me as I sometimes are going to be a little bit more conservative about our recommendations than the community would want. Because where you are, you need help. And we're going to be able to help sometimes, but not all the time. Right? And that's got to be the way that we operate here. Let me just see here. Yeah, let me conclude with there's a series of questions about this question about where did all of our money and work go, and did it really matter? I think this is a big conversation. I've come back, and I'm going to increasingly make the case that I can show you demonstrable areas, these close elections, right? I don't think we would have won these Senate races without all the work of this collective, muscular Democratic grassroots. But I think the national party, and I think this is going to come out in the chairs race, uh, is very much a um, we have to have a big conversation about why Donald Trump was able to beat us with less field and less ads, and that we had more and we didn't win. And whether the answer is going to be, well, that all that money got us closer than we would have gotten otherwise, but the national party and the campaign and those that ran the campaign have a really major obligation to come talk to us about all this. All of you, so many of you left it on the playing field, right, in this election. And I'm so grateful for that. And you as investors, as volunteers, as patriots, have to be assured that that money and time was well spent in order for you to do it again. I mean, this is a very kind of fundamental kind of baseline communication that we have to have. I mean, what I've been very pleased by at Hopium is that we've actually grown since the election. We haven't lost members, which I just didn't know. And I've been really proud of that. I mean, I was kind of prepared for, Hopium to start shrinking and for the economics of this place to start changing. That's not happening right now. It hasn't happened yet. We'll see what happens. But in part because I think many of you feel like you got your money's worth here, right? I mean, for 45 bucks, or many of you on today are not even paid members, 45 bucks a year, you got Simon coming to you probably far too often than you wanted. You got to meet all sorts of amazing people from all over the country. You got to work on campaigns, many of whom won, right? We had real wins here. And so I think that I think that what I'm pleased by is so far the response from this community has been, and there are people that are going to leave, and that's fine. They move on. They may want to take a year off or, whatever. That's all everyone, it's very fluid here, these kinds of substacks, right? But I also want to pitch to you that as you think about how you're going to engage over the next year, if you are a happy Hopium person, bring in your friends. I mean, we need to grow in order to get louder and to have direct the party going forward as we come out of this dark period for us. And I never imagined this is getting as big as it is now, frankly. But we can get bigger and have more influence. And certainly with additional money, I can professionalize the project more, right? And make everything look a little bit nicer and easier to digest and have the thing be a little bit more tightly edited every day. And as all of you know, I kind of throw this thing out there without a heavy edit. And some of you don't mind. I get lots of former English teachers being pissed off at me sometimes for my grammar. I don't really care. That's okay. But there are things we can do to make this better and more interesting and more fulfilling for you. And so help me grow Hopium. And so I'll just close by saying I didn't know I was going to do this today. I was going to do this other thing, but this morning as I was sort of finishing it, I felt that I needed more time to do with it what I wanted to make it worthwhile. If you want to watch the old With Dems, they're on the site. But the stuff that's in With Dems about us being this extraordinary force for good for all the people of the world and creating a global system that created more opportunity for more people than any other global system in human history. And the fact that our last three Democratic presidents have created, huge job growth and wage growth and prosperity for America, and Republicans have continued to be a wrecking ball in our society. These fundamental understandings and with Dems that really were the understandings that drove Hopium is like a descendant of the original With Dems presentation that I did in 2017, is that I just want to say to all of you with the most powerful emotions and brain power that I can bring to this, that we have continually made the lives of people here and around the world better. And we have to have less self-doubt. We have to be not view the world as the glass is always half empty and all the things that we didn't do, but to start with celebrating all the amazing things that we have done and come to a great understanding of how much we have made the lives of people here and around the world better and how much they haven't, right? It is unbelievable. The track record of the Republican Party over the last, since Reagan, has been disastrous. And they've led to three recessions, the last two of the most severe in American history. And part of the reason we have Trumpism is because the establishment Republican Party failed and the Republican Party was overtaken by extremists because the extremists said that the Republicans who were in charge failed all of us. And they did, actually. The economic strategy of Bush and during his presidency failed. And so did the second Bush, right? His economic strategy failed. Both of the Bush presidencies led to recession. The second recession that Bush oversaw was incredibly disruptive and not only led to a big recession, but an incredible loss of wealth, particularly of older white working people in America. And there was this massive shock in our system back in 2007 and 2008 that created incredible loss of wealth and dislocation in the United States that reverberated forward. And then the other big shock that happened was the Trump recession and COVID, where we had a second unbelievable shock to our system as a country. Both of those were presided over by Republicans. And in many ways, I believe, and I said this earlier, that I think the Harris campaign, I think, slightly misunderstood the last shock that we had. The last shock wasn't just inflation. It was COVID itself. John Del Volpe and I talk about this a lot. COVID was arguably the biggest shock to the American political system in 100 years, or since World War I, World War II, whatever you want to call it. The massive dislocation that took place for young people, for young people in particular, right? They had less life to look back on. So the shock of COVID was such a major part of their entire understanding of the world. And this country has gone through these huge shocks, both presided over through incompetent Republican presidents. And those shocks, though, which we then managed and made better, Joe Biden took the shock of COVID and got us to the other side. Barack Obama took the shock of the Great Recession and got us to the other side. We repaired the damage done by these failed Republican presidents, and yet we're paying the price for it now. And I think that of all the critiques that I think as I said earlier, that I find to be the early takes, the hot takes, to be the most ridiculous, are the ones that are condemning the Democratic Party for not being on the side of working people. What more could Joe Biden have done over the last 4 years than to have gotten us to the other side of COVID successfully, to have lowered the uninsured rate, to got us to the lowest peacetime unemployment rate since the 1940s, to have invested in unprecedented resources in workers without college degrees, to giving them more opportunities through the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, and the IRA, right? To have done everything in his power to have prevented the planet from warming, so that young people today and people in the United States don't have these massively expensive climate disruptions that are happening every few years, or rising sea levels, and all the things that are going to come with a warming planet. I mean, we were out there every day in this last 4 years fighting for everyday people. And why it is there wasn't a greater understanding of that in this electorate, in this election, is really, to me, the question. Not whether we did, but why it is that we were not more persuasive in convincing people that that's where we were coming from. And that's where I think the work has to do. But this notion that our agenda or our values or our aren't squarely behind sort of the struggle of everyday people to get ahead, as Kamala Harris said, not just to get by, but to get ahead. Opportunity has been the core of the Democratic offering in the modern era of our politics. And I do think that one of the things that I believe is that, as I discussed with John Del Volpe, is that we were able to shut down Democrats during COVID. And I think we got, for too many people, particularly Hispanics, we got on the other side of opportunity. If I could wave one magic wand, right, and maybe I'm premature in saying this, I think reconnecting the Democratic Party to upward mobility and opportunity, not just getting by, but getting ahead, is, I think, one of our central projects. We can debate about how the best way to get there, but if we are not for the upward mobility of everyday people and the ability of everyday people to get ahead, and to seize control of their lives and to have the kind of lives they all want to have, then what are we, right? I mean, it is the core of what it means to be a Democrat. Freedom, opportunity, these are the foundational values of us. And again, everyone, this was not a shellacking. This was not a blowout election. This was not a mandate. This was a narrow, painful, difficult loss. But I think Trump is already misreading the circumstances and has already made big mistakes. He's already, I think, creating unbelievable negative noise. His honeymoon is almost already over by the fact that he's putting forward, a pedophile and a child rapist, forward as his attorney general, and sort of the level of outrage that is starting to generate, as it should. He made a big mistake. And I think we have to have great confidence in ourselves that we can go prosecute this next phase against them and prevail on the other side. I'll be doing that here at Hopium. So proud to have all of you along the journey with me here. Let me know where you think I got things wrong. Trust me, I know you will. Let me know where you think I got things right. And I will say again, this was a sketch today, everybody. This is, how I'm seeing it today. That may change as we get more information and come to greater understandings. Love being in this fight with all of you. I'm so proud of this community that we built together. Let's keep our heads down. Let's keep doing the hard work, and let's go, build this next chapter of the Democratic Party together. Thanks all.